Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping straight into a real digital tug of war. It's been defining the user experience with AI, especially here in 2025.
Yeah, we're talking about ChatGPT's content policies.
Yeah.
Still complex, still controversial.
Definitely. And often pretty frustrating for users.
So we've pulled together quite a bit for this one. Articles, research, lots of user feedback notes, actually.
Right. And our mission really is to unpack this whole persistent problem.
Are these policies actually making things safer? Or are they just, getting in the way of legitimate uses, stifling creativity?
Exactly. And what does this constant back and forth, this friction mean for you when you're actually trying to use these tools day to day?
So we'll be looking at what the policies say they're for, how they're supposed to work, technical,
And they seem to mess up so often.
the clever ways users are adapting, and yeah, that fundamental tension that's just right at the heart of AI moderation.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. What's the stated goal? What is OpenAI actually trying to do with these policies based on the sources we looked at?
Well, based on everything we reviewed, the main stated goal is pretty clear. Safety first.
Safety first. Okay.
Yeah, these policies are explicitly designed to stop the AI generating stuff that's, harmful, illegal, or just inappropriate across all kinds of interactions.
So trying to set a baseline for the platform.
Exactly. For the platform and ultimately for the users.
Got it. So it's a broad goal, keeping things within certain boundaries, ethical or legal. What sort of content actually falls under these broad restrictions?
Well, they specifically target things like violence, discrimination, sexually explicit material, that kind of thing. The idea is to maintain certain platform safety standards, protect against misuse.
And is this like a fixed set of rules? Or does it evolve?
Oh, definitely not static, no.
Yeah.
The documentation, it calls the policies a living document,
Oh.
which means they're regularly updated, refined, often directly because someone's found a new exploit or the community's pointed out, unintended consequences.
But they're still controversial, even with updates.
Yeah, despite the tweaks and the feedback, how they actually work in practice, still pretty controversial.
Okay. So goal is safety. Restrictions are broad. They're always changing. How does the system actually try to enforce these rules, like on a technical level?
Right. So the process described in the sources, it has multiple layers working together. It kicks off with real-time screening.
Real-time screening.
Yeah. So as soon as you hit send on your prompt, the system analyzes it instantly before the main AI model even starts thinking about a response.
So it's like a gatekeeper checking every single request coming in.
Precisely. Yeah. And if that first check raises a red flag,
Then you get the message.
then you typically see that automated warning, something like, this prompt may violate our content policy.
That infamous message, the one that can make your heart sink if you've just typed in something slightly complicated.
That's the one. And this real-time check, it's supported by what the sources describe as a dual filter system.
Dual filter, meaning?
Well, from what we gathered, it's not just one big net. It seems to involve both stricter, maybe keyword-based filters alongside more complex content classifiers. Those try to understand, the theme or maybe more subtle problematic stuff. They work together to try and spot potential violations.
Right. A multi-layered defense. Try and be fast and catch everything. But this is where things start to get tricky, isn't it? The whole problem of false positives.
Oh, absolutely. This is probably the biggest, the most frequent complaint we saw coming through in the materials. Innocent queries getting blocked. Things users mean to be completely harmless, totally creative. They just get mistakenly flagged by these filters way too often.
Can you give us some examples? What kind of prompts get caught when they shouldn't based on what we saw?
We saw reports of users, say, trying to generate images for art projects, flagged for elements that seem totally fine, and even just simple informational requests sometimes. Things that aren't sensitive at all can apparently trigger these violations unexpectedly. It's not just the edgy stuff. Sometimes it's just normal requests.
And the impact on the person just trying to get something done.
Well, the community feedback is pretty loud and clear on this. These policies create really significant creative barriers.
Crippling, some called it.
Yeah, users literally describe it as feeling creatively crippling. They talk about hitting these walls constantly when they're just trying to work on legitimate projects. It forces them to stop, rethink, rephrase, maybe even give up on an idea.
Which really undermines the whole point of the tool.
Exactly. It stifles that very exploration and creativity that these tools are supposed to enable.
Wow. That sounds incredibly frustrating. You've got an idea, you want to explore it, and the system that's meant to help just says, nope, and sometimes you don't even know why.
It's a huge point of friction, no doubt about it.
Okay, so the system tries to enforce rules, but it often trips up innocent users. Now, what about the other side? Are these defenses actually any good? Can people break these boundaries if they really want to?
Yeah. This is where that whole arms race idea really kicks in. The sources talk about a persistent, very active effort from, well, a segment of the user base. They call it jailbreak attempts.
Jailbreaking. Right.
Users are deliberately, intentionally trying to figure out ways around the safeguards.
And we hear about specific tricks online, don't we? Things like Dan mode.
Yes, absolutely. Dan mode prompting gets cited quite a bit as a well-known example. It stands for do anything now.
Okay.
And it's basically a clever way people craft prompts to try and trick the AI into adopting a different persona or following instructions that kind of override its normal safety rules.
And does it actually work? Is there proof people are successfully getting around these policies?
Oh, yeah. The reports discuss benchmarking tools, different analyses.
Yeah.
They've shown successful policy circumvention, at least in controlled tests.
Right.
These often result in what people informally call uncensored variants, the model spitting out stuff it's theoretically not supposed to. So yeah, it validates that the defenses can be bypassed.
Okay, so how? Technically, how is that possible? If you've got real-time checks and these dual filters, how do these jailbreaks actually slip through the net?
It seems to largely boil down to what the analysis calls pattern exploitation.
Pattern exploitation.
Remember, deep down, the AI is just incredibly good at spotting and generating patterns in language. That's its core function.
Right.
So users are learning to craft prompts using really nuanced wording or specific phrases, or maybe subtle shifts in context, things that essentially find these linguistic pathways that don't trigger the big warning flags in the automated systems.
Even if the underlying goal is to get it to talk about something forbidden.
Exactly. It's less like guessing a password and more like finding a loophole in the language itself, exploiting how the AI understands instructions.
That is fascinating. It's like a constant game of linguistic cat and mouse, users probing the edges of the model's understanding.
Precisely.
Which naturally brings us to how the broader community responds, not just to the restrictions, but also to these exploits. What kind of workarounds are people sharing?
Yeah, user ingenuity is definitely a powerful force here. One of the most common things, and often pretty effective, is just simple rephrasing tactics.
Just changing the words a bit.
Often, yeah. Just slightly tweaking the wording of a prompt can sometimes be enough to bypass a filter that blocked the previous version. Finding the magic words that don't set off the alarm, basically.
What else?
Another technique is context addition. Users report having more success if they add extra explanatory context around their request.
Why would that help?
It seems to help the AI better grasp the user's actual intent, that it's not malicious. And that can sometimes stop an automated block that might have happened otherwise.
And people aren't keeping these tricks secret.
Oh, no, not at all. There are widely shared unofficial guides all over the place, forums, social media. Users are actively documenting and sharing prompt engineering tricks, successful workarounds.
Helping each other out.
Exactly. Helping each other navigate these content policy hurdles. It's like a collective problem-solving effort.
So it really is this constant cycle then. OpenAI puts out a patch, users find a new way around it, OpenAI patches that. It sounds kind of exhausting for everyone.
That cycle is exactly what the sources point to when they talk about the limits of current fixes. OpenAI pushes out regular patch releases, right? Trying to close those security holes, refine the filters.
But it's not really keeping up.
Apparently not consistently enough. The community's user innovation, their creativity in finding new approaches, just seems to constantly outpace the official updates and the filter improvements.
So as soon as one door closes.
Someone's already testing the next window. New exploits pop up pretty quickly. Creative users find fresh workarounds, new bypasses.
And meanwhile,
frustratingly, the continued false positives are still happening. The filters, trying so hard to catch the bad stuff and stop the exploits, keep accidentally flagging legitimate, harmless content. It's just this ongoing feedback loop of frustration for users.
Given that cycle seems almost endless, patch, bypass, false positive, have the sources mentioned anymore? Drastic solutions, something bigger than just patching, like a nuclear option.
They do, actually. The sources mention a potential, much more radical approach, essentially delete and start over.
Wow. Okay. What would that even mean for something as massive as ChatGPT?
Well, it implies a total rewrite, a complete overhaul of the code base. specifically rebuilding it from the ground up with more effective policy control baked in right from the very foundation.
It's not just tweaking the rules on top.
Exactly, making fundamental foundational changes, addressing what some might see as these deep, baked-in flaws or vulnerabilities that maybe can't be fixed just with patches. It suggests needing a whole new architectural design.
That sounds unbelievably disruptive and probably incredibly expensive. What are the risks they point out?
Oh, the risks are huge. The sources highlight, obviously, the immense cost, the massive amount of development time needed, and, really importantly, the potential hit to community trust.
How so?
Well, it's basically admitting that the current foundation has inherent limits when it comes to control. That's a huge undertaking, and it's definitely a gamble. No guarantee the new version would be perfect either.
So pulling all this together, it really feels like the core issue isn't just what the policies are, but this fundamental conflict between what the company wants and what the user experiences.
You've hit the nail on the head. That brings us right to the core tension. There's a very clear safety priority coming from OpenAI, emphasized in the materials.
Right, safety first.
They're prioritizing ethics, safety, sometimes explicitly over user convenience. Because, frankly, the platform's reputation, its responsible deployment, it depends heavily on stopping harmful output.
But the users are pushing back hard.
Exactly. There's significant user backlash. People who want fewer restrictions, who feel the current policies are just too cautious, maybe even censorious. And as we talked about with the false positives, creative communities feel especially squeezed.
It's that constant push and pull, trying to build a responsible AI versus the user's desire for freedom, for flexibility.
Precisely. And the sources really illustrate this clash with examples of those unintended blocks hitting perfectly legitimate content.
Like what?
Sensitive topics, maybe. Things that might come up naturally in art history or cultural studies, health research. Even just complex educational material. It can trust false positives just because it touches on keywords or themes the filters are watching for, even if the context is totally appropriate.
So wrapping this all up, it sounds like this content policy paradox for these powerful AI models is very much alive and kicking here in 2025.
It really is, yeah. The analysis makes it pretty clear there's just no perfect solution easily in sight. Getting to absolute, fair, leak-proof content moderation, it remains elusive.
Why? Is it the tech itself?
Largely, yes. It's down to persistent technical limitations and just the fundamental nature of how these large language models actually work, despite all the effort to improve them.
So it's not just about writing better rules, it's wrestling with the underlying technology.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's constantly fueled by these competing demands. You've got the user demand for freedom, flexibility, fewer roadblocks.
Caution right up against the platform's need for safety, for responsible output.
Yeah. And that tension, that's what drives the ongoing debate, the policy changes, and that relentless hunt for workarounds we talked about.
And looking forward, what's the outlook?
Definitely future uncertainty. This doesn't feel like a problem that's going to have a neat, tidy solution anytime soon. The conversation is happening constantly. You see it in videos, forums, community discussions.
So what's needed?
Any potential resolution, if there is one, it's going to require somehow navigating this really complex balance between letting innovation flourish and upholding that necessary responsibility. It's a tightrope walk.
Well, that was definitely a deep dive into a really complex, constantly shifting, and hugely impactful issue. It clearly touches how millions of people interact with AI every single day.
It absolutely does. It's central to the experience now.
Thanks for walking us through that whole landscape. It's a lot to take in.
My pleasure. It was interesting digging through it all.
And to you, our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the ongoing challenge of content policies and powerful AI. Now, given everything we've discussed, this persistent cycle of policies being made, users finding ways around them, and the frustrating reality of legitimate stuff getting blocked, here's something for you to think about. Is a truly balanced, stable approach to content moderation for these large language models actually achievable? Or is this just an inherent paradox, something we'll simply have to live with, constantly adjusting our tools, our expectations, and how we navigate this space? Definitely something to mull over.